In this video, we are going to demonstrate how we can design bone reduction guides with GuideMia, especially for the situations when the patient's bone density is really low and it's extremely hard to do 3D bone reconstruction, especially for the posterior sides. Here is the 016 case. We have finished the treatment planning. We have the 6 implants, we have 3 anchor pins in place, and we have a radiography guide. And we are going to design bone reduction guides, and we're going to design a positioning guide with the digital denture design. So first, let's load the denture file. So we're going to load the denture file. That's a digital denture design STL file. This file can be a digital design, or it can also be a scan from into our scanner or desktop scanner. It doesn't matter. Pretty much this is the same design as the radiography guide. Now we want to register this denture design with radiography guide. Rotate the views so that we see them from a similar orientation. We start picking points. In order to align them, we will pick a point from here, a point from here, a point in the anterior side, and a point on the posterior side. Now we have our initial registration. If we want to adjust the registration, we can pick more points. For example, pick a point there, and we pick a point here. Now the adjustment has been made, and we can tell the results is improved. And here we can pick another point. So if we pick a wrong point, we can just click to delete this, and pick a point to delete this. Then pick a point from here, pick a point from here. Now we finish the registration, and we say finish alignment. Now let's take a look at the bone structure. Make this one as a current. If we zoom in, we can see the bone structure on the patient's right side. The bone density is really low. It's very hard to do a bone reconstruction. And on the left side, there is some high density material inside the radiography guide, so it stays here. Before we can do the bone reduction guide, we have to create a nice bone structure from this. So the approach we are going to take is we are going to use different thresholds for different part of the bone structure, and then we combine them into a single model for bone reduction and surgical guide creation. Now we go to segmentation, so that we can do, first we are going to deal with the patient's right side. We can make the region of interest smaller. We can lower the threshold value and pick a point in the patient's right side. Now we have a segmentation of this bone structure in this area. The reason we go low threshold is that we want to get into more pixels, and we can tell in this area it has some good bone surfaces as a base. Then in order to further create a bone structure from this area, we can use this tissue pinning function. Let's just make sure we have enough on the posterior side. Then you use tissue pinning function will let us fill in the surface area so we don't have the pockets and the holes on the bone surface. Now we have relatively solid bone structure here, and if we want to further close the hole, we can lower the threshold or we can increase this value. And for structures like this, we can use scatter removal tool to cut it away. For example, we can cut this area. And for here, because we are going to create a second part of the bone structure in this area, so we can leave this alone. Now we can use this button to select an area of the bone structure as part of the base for our surgical guide design. We can get rid of this hole from here. Now once we close this, the system will do a cutting. I'm going to hide this view. So we can see this piece has been selected. Now in the second part of this operation, we're going to get the middle part of the bone structure. So we will adjust the areas to be in the middle part. And the system is recreate the segmentation. Then we need to reselect the seed point because the region of interest has changed. Now we have the middle part of the bone structure, and obviously the threshold value is too low because we are getting the tissues into this, so we can increase the threshold value. And this area was where we do the scatter removal at the first step. So we can go to the object manager, find that's cutting operation. We can even find this tissue pinning operation we did to fill the hole, to delete both of them. So we can have the original bone structure here. If we come back from the segmentation, we can further increase the threshold so we can see this area better. So we have a quite solid bone structure here. And if we want to get more on the posterior side, we can expand on this end. Now we use this tissue pinning function to improve the surface quality. Now we have a nice clean bone structure in this area. We can use this button again to select this area, and also we notice that this is partially overlapping with the first one. We don't have enough material here. We could have a gap in this area, so we want to make it bigger on the patient's right side. We expand that. We rotate from here. Now we can see a better view of this. So if we want to further expand this to be more solid, we can do that. Now we tell the system select this area also as my base for surgical guide design. Now I have this piece, and in the meantime we can check this is actually where our last implant is. We can go to the posterior side a little bit more so we can have more material. So we can go to a smaller area like this, then we can move to the posterior, and we would need a different seat point. If I double click here, that's where we are. We can add another seat point so that we segment the posterior side. Now we can see they come together like this. So this is where the high density material in the radiographic guide, and till this point is more than enough what we need, but we have to get rid of this piece. So we use scatter removal tool to cut away this. Now we need to get rid of this piece too. If we look at the whole area here, so the surgical guide can extend to this place, so that's more than enough. And then we tell the system, okay, I'm done with this, circle this area so that we can use it for surgical guide design. Now we have 3 pieces as their combination can be used for the surgical guide design. If at this time we need to clean up anything, for example, look at the first piece, we didn't notice that we have a spike here. Then we can go back, make this one as current, so we can see the spike here. And we do have a functions under tool to cut by profile. We can cut away this piece. Because this is no longer bone structure, it's a surface model, so the scatter removal tool will not work for this, but this solid cutting function should be able to clean up this piece. Now we are going to perform the surgical guide design. Enter surgical guide design. By default, it's going to think we're going to create a surgical guide with the denture model, which is a conventional full-arch surgical guide. But in this case, we want to tell the system we are going to create bone-level surgical guide. And also tell the system we are going to use the multiple bone segments we created as a base for surgical guide design. We can answer yes here. Now the system is combining the bone segments and create a combined model so we can continue surgical guide design. We go to bone reduction guide. This is a plane for the bone reduction, and we can rotate the plane. Rotate it from different views so we can look at the bone structure. We can use the middle button to move up. We want to cut a little bit more here, and we can adjust the orientations too. That's how we adjust the bone reduction surface. Now we are going to define the area we are going to perform bone reduction. Define the depth of the cutting. Cut this area. Now we are going to define the boundary, the coverage of the surgical guide. We can use the checking function, or we can use the circle and cut function. If we use checking, we can avoid this area. Typically, when your bone model is not that smooth, we probably want to use circle and cut combination. Otherwise, if it's smooth like this, we can use check and cut combination. Either way, it's able to create the surface model for us so that we can generate surgical guide. If we look at the implant orientations, we probably want to use this orientation as the undercut direction or the direction of the insertion path. We can give a little bit more consideration to the posterior implant. So in the middle, and we click this button. And for surgical guide design, we do have two options. We have two individual surgical guides and bone reduction guides, such as two pieces, or stackable. That's the surgical guides over bone reduction guides. We're going to generate a stackable guides using this. So after generating the combined guides, it's going to split it into two pieces, a surgical guide over a bone reduction guide. Now this is our surgical guide design and the bone reduction guide. This is according to implant position and the drill tool. So for this small 3mm implants, the system does have a longer drill, so that's how it looks like. Then next, we are going to add connectors so that the surgical guide can snap into the bone reduction guide. So we click this button. We're going to add the feature here. So that's a block. And we're going to cut a slot on the bone reduction guide and add a block on the upper level surgical guide. So we'll finish this one. We will add another one. And we add one on the anterior, on the lingual side. Finish. We can add as we need. Then we have the combined stackable surgical guide and a bone reduction guide. The next, we're going to generate a guide that can be used as positioning guide, so that we can use to check whether the surgical guide is placed in a right position. That's basically a guide created from the denture. So we use the denture to subtract the bone reduction guide. So that's how we create that. So the denture can be at a surgical time can be placed over the bone reduction guide. So we can use that to check the bite. Now we go back to the planning page. We can see this is a positioning guide. There are accessory materials here. We can use simple tools like cutting, or we can use you just print this guide and then use tools to remove the materials from here so that this positioning guide can sit onto the bone reduction guide. Then you can use the combination of them to position the guides properly, to check the bite with the remaining teeth, to drill the anchor pin holes. Then you can take out the positioning guides, perform bone reduction and the implant surgical guides, put on the implant surgical guides. In the surgical guides we see here, we don't have glue channels. If we do want to have glue channels, we can go in the setting page. Before we generate the guide, we turn on the glue setting. This setting should remain on and or remain off after you do the setting. Now in the second part of this demo, we're going to create a combination of the tissue surface and the bone structure and generate a hybrid surgical guide that is partially set on the patient's tissue and partially on the bone structure, so you can perform bone reduction and surgical process. Assuming we have the bone structure in the middle created as we did in the first part, we delete the other bone segment. Now we take a look at our denture model. Essentially, the tissue surface is the adaptation surface of the denture model. We can use this one as a base for our tissue. Otherwise, we can have an optical scan of the current soft tissue. Now we take this one here, we go to model processing here, we can trim and make a solid out of this. So we're going to create a solid model out of this tissue surface. So we're going to extract the tissue toward this plane. So we have this first. In order to actually, we don't want to block the view for now. We're going to use this tool to go around this area. So we can cut this piece. Basically we select this, but in the meantime, we actually also select the other side. We don't need this piece, so we do one more selection. The system will be able to detect this is the part we want, and it's going to get rid of this piece. Now we have the tissue surface. We can move this plane back. Then we'll create a solid model out of this tissue surface by do the extrusion operation. Now we have this tissue model. We basically create this dental model out of the denture skin. Now, in order to create a surgical guides combining the tissue area, the bone area in the middle, we can get rid of this piece because we have a bone structure here. Now we are going to cut this area. So we are going to remove the bone area and keep the posterior site for the tissue level surgical guide. And we go to tools. We use this cutting tool. We're going to cut away this area because we have a good bone structure here. Now we have the tissue with bone and tissue. Now we are going to tell the system, remember this, set that as part of our surgical guide. Then we go to surgical guide design, accept this. Then we go to guide design, we tell the system we are performing bone level surgical guide. Because we had the original bone level material, now we do a reset. It's going to recreate the base for our surgical guide design based on the denture model and the bone structure. Now here is a combination of tissue and bone. And this is the area supposedly we are going to do a bone reduction. So we go to bone reduction guide so that we can define the cutting. This is where we are, so just accept this. So we're going to cut through this area. We go to define the cutting area by this. We can make this area smaller. Drag this. That's where we were. Finish cutting. Then we will select the boundary for our surgical guide design. Generate guide. Now we have a surgical guide that's set on the soft tissue on the posterior side and on the bone structure on the anterior side. And we have a stackable surgical guide over the bone reduction guide. And we also have those glue channels for each of the implant site.